Hello, everyone. I'm one half of your duo, the Ambiguous Assassin. Unfortunately, P can't be here this week, so I'm doing the breakdown solo for a stacked fight night card, Dariush versus Saryukian. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with the prelims, Veronica Hardy versus Jamey-Lyn Horth. I believe in Veronica Hardy's last fight, she did look very good against Juliana Miller. However, Juliana Miller's lack of striking and her ability as a taller fighter to catch Hardy with some of her straight shots, even though they weren't the best setup, make me think Hardy going up against Jamey-Lyn Horth, who is a better striker than Juliana Miller, has better takedown defense. Juliana Miller, better kicks, and is also very tall and long for the division, like Juliana Miller, will give Veronica Harding a hard time in this fight. So I would have to go with Jamey-Lyn Horth winning by decision. I think she's going to land a nice body kicks from the outside and just outpoint Veronica Hardy in this fight. Moving on to Wellington Turman versus Jared Gooden. This is a great fight. Both fighters are very good. Wellington Turman has moved it down and made 170 his new home from 185. And since moving down to 170, he's been training in Connecticut with Glover Teixeira and Alex Pereira, which has done wonders for his striking and his wrestling, with him being a jiu-jitsu guy. And I think that's going to show a lot in this fight, because in Wellington Turman's last fight against Randy Brown, who's a guy who's a perennial kind of top 15 or hovers around the top 15, he's a guy that is very long, great at fighting from the outside, and is a very tough out from a lot of people at 170. And Wellington Turman arguably beat him. And I think that speaks volumes. And in this fight against the guy in Gooden, who is stiff at times, uses a lot of his boxing, jab, leg kicks, and fights heavy on the lead leg, I think Wellington Turman's improvements in his striking, the great leg kicks he showed against Randy Brown, are going to work wonders in this fight. And if the fight does hit the ground, Wellington Turman, I believe, has a massive advantage. So I would have to go with Wellington Turman in this fight by submission or decision. Moving on to Rodolfo Bellato versus Ihor Potieria. This is Bellato's debut. However, he did fight on the Contender Series in his first outing on the Contender Series. He fought twice on it against Vitor Petrino. Vitor Petrino, since joining the UFC, has been fantastic. He has shown he's a guy who in the next few years is very much so going to be in that title picture. And the fact that he had such a close fight with him, and it was pretty back and forth, and he lost after throwing an ill-advised spinning elbow that got him caught by a hook by Vitor Petrino and KO'd. That speaks volumes for his skill level moving into this rebuilding 205 division. I believe Bellato's takedown defense, which has shown to be very good, his boxing, power, and cardio is really going to give a lot of troubles to Potieria coming into this fight. Potieria is a guy who outside is 1-2. He's fought pretty good competition. He had a win over Shogun, but as he's faced guys who are that next level of top 15 in Carlos Ulberg and Nicolau, I'm going to butcher his name, Nurmilino, he did get knocked out in both those fights. And looking back at his record before going on the Contender Series and joining the UFC, he fought a guy that was 10-7 and a guy who was 5-11. So although Potieria has a good record, I don't think it is indicative of the level of opposition he can handle. And I believe Rodolfo Bellato, with his fights I've seen and his fight against Petrino, given his striking and overall game, is going to be a guy who's going to eventually move into the top 15. And I just don't believe Potieria is at that level. And I think he's going to get knocked out by Bellato. Next is Melquizael Costa versus Steve Garcia. I think in this fight, the deciding factor is going to be the striking and primarily the kicks of Costa, who has shown great striking in both his outings in the UFC. He also has shown great takedown defense. I think Garcia, when it comes to power, Costa wins out. I think he's a slightly better striker, and I don't believe Steve Garcia has the ability to take him down. So in this fight, I have to go with Mademoiselle Costa. Next fight, Drakkar Klose versus Joe Solecki. I think this fight, Drakkar Klose is a guy who you can't point to one area in his game that is a blatant weakness. He is fairly good everywhere, which most people might see as him not being great in any specific area. But what that does is it makes Drakkar Klose good enough to fight where he is strongest and fight people where they are weakest. And that has been shown in his marquee wins over Lando Venata, Bobby Green, and his last win over Rafa Garcia. Joe Solecki is a guy who's shown promise at times, but has not gotten that marquee win or beaten a guy who hovers around the top 15 like Drakkar Klose has. And he has shown weaknesses in his striking. His wrestling is pretty good. When the fight gets to the ground, Joe Solecki is very good. But Drakkar Klose, being a high-level wrestler, I think is going to be able to stop the takedown, force Solecki to strike with him, and win a decision or possibly get a finish on the feet. Moving on to Zachary Reese versus Cody Brundage. I believe Cody Brundage in this fight does not necessarily have the wrestling nor the striking to stop a guy like Zachary Reese, who's very tall and long for the division, has shown great striking, great power. He also has great submissions on the ground as well. And I think all those things just spell trouble for a guy like Brundage. So I think in this fight, I have to pick Zachary Reese, even though he's making his debut. I think he has a lot of promise in this division. All right, next fight, Miesha Tate versus Julia Avila. In Miesha Tate's comeback, she did beat Lauren Renault. She has fought a lot of high-level female fighters, but hasn't gotten that marquee win since coming back against a high-ranking opponent. Although she's been competitive, I think she's only getting older against Avila, who is also older herself. I don't think she has the mileage that Miesha Tate has with the wars she's been in, the finishes that Miesha Tate has suffered. And I think in this fight, the deciding factor is going to be the straight shots and the distance management of Avila, who I believe has the slightly better striking and the takedown defense to stop Miesha Tate's takedowns, and I believe edge out a unanimous decision. Moving on up the card, Punahele Soriano versus Dustin Stoltzfus. Both of these fighters are wrestlers where Stoltzfus uses his wrestling more offensively to grind out decisions or get submissions. Punahele uses it more to stop the takedown and land his vicious boxing strikes, his overhands, his hooks, which have monumentous power in them. And I think that's going to be the game plan Punahele implements in this fight is a sprawl and brawl style where he stops the takedowns and lands big shots on Stoltzfus that has shown to have a questionable chin in the past. So in this fight, I have to go with Punahele Soriano, and I believe he gets the knockout in this fight. Moving on, Clay Guida versus Joaquim Silva. I believe Joaquim Silva in this fight has the advantage of being able to stop the takedown, big strikes. He has a well-rounded game, good jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and striking. He's a guy that a lot of fans thought was going to move into the top 15, who had a large gap of absence in his career, similar to Drakkar Klose for some reason. But further, nonetheless, moving up, he fights a guy like Clay Guida, who is getting up there in age, who also has been finished in a few fights. And I think just the wars Guida's been in, what it's done to his chin, his durability, I think Joaquim Silva is going to be able to get him out of there. Joaquim Silva is a guy who in his last fight who fought Saryukin, was able to rock him in the third round and have him in big danger in that fight. And I think that overall power is going to lead him to a win over Guida. Moving up the card, Sean Brady versus Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum is moving down to 170 after a long hiatus from the division where he moved up and fought at 185 and had success. I believe Kelvin Gastelum moving down is a great decision. He was slightly undersized. He seems to be dedicated to the sport, looked great in his last fight against Chris Curtis. And I think those improvements he showed in that fight bode well in his fight against Sean Brady. Sean Brady is coming off of his first loss against Beneil Dariush, where he showed to not maybe have the best cardio and best chin. Also, he did show as you pressure him backwards, he will shoot and telegraph his takedowns. And pressuring him is a road to victory that was shown by Beneil. And Brady, before his loss to Beneil Dariush, was an undefeated guy. And we've seen in the past when these undefeated guys finally lose and the blueprint is out there, a lot of people can implement the same game plan and win fights against them. And I think that is the case here with Kelvin Gastelum. He has the takedown defense. He has the boxing, the power. He showed great calf kicks in his last fight, which could work very well against a guy like Sean Brady, who fights heavy on the lead leg. And when Brady did get stung by big shots from Beneil, he covered up. He didn't really throw back, and he kind of shelled up and allowed Beneil to reel off boxing combinations on him, which is going to be something that is going to be a recipe for disaster against a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, who I believe has slightly better boxing and a lot more power. So I have to go with Kelvin Gastelum in this fight. Moving on, we have Davis Figueiredo making his bantamweight debut against the fan favorite Rob Font. A lot of what I believe made Davis Figueiredo great is his overall marauder style of moving forward, landing big shots, being well-rounded, and just getting people out of there at 125. He did play that role of the bully at flyweight, and he was really able to put a beating on guys. However, I don't think this will be the case moving up a weight class to 135. I don't think Davis Figueiredo can get a guy like Rob Font, who's shown to have a good chin in his UFC career, out of there with just one punch. Also, we did see in his fights with Moreno that if you can outlast and not get finished by Figueiredo, it seems to kind of mess with Figueiredo. If you turn the tides, you can Figueiredo is a guy that's used to being the hammer and getting people out of there quickly. And if you're able to withstand his strikes, he does slow down and he will succumb to people who are able to pressure him in these kinds of back and forth dogfights. And I think against a guy like Rob Font, who has a great jab, great cardio, durability, high work rate, he can implement a similar game plan that Moreno did to beat Figueiredo, maybe not shoot as many takedowns. However, he did show in his Cody Garbrandt fight that he can wrestle at times and mix it up with his striking. And I think that overall, he can just put the pressure on Figueiredo, probably gas out Figueiredo, and really give him a hard time fighting behind the perfect jab that Rob Font has. So in this fight, I have to go with Rob Font. Moving on to Jalen Turner versus Bobby Green. Jalen Turner is coming in on short notice. But I don't think that going into this fight is as much of an adjustment for Jalen Turner as it will be for Bobby Green. Bobby Green is going from fighting Dan Hooker, who did fight Jalen Turner in his last fight. I think Dan Hooker is 6 foot. Jalen Turner is 6'3", which is absolutely ridiculous for 155. He's great at fighting at range, long range, medium range, and close range. Wherever you fight Jalen Turner, he is very good at. He's good at keeping the end of his punches. If you get past that, you want to clinch him, he's great with knees, elbows, framing, just landing a lot of vicious techniques on the inside. And going up against a guy like Bobby Green, who primarily likes to box, who does have a well-rounded game, but mostly likes to get in these stand-up battles to entertain the fans. He has shown he won't mix it up and really use a wrestle-heavy, grappling-heavy game plan to win fights. And I think that benefits Jalen Turner, even though Jalen Turner has shown great takedown defense at times. Again, this fights with Mateusz Gamrot. The way to beat Jalen Turner has always kind of been to out-grapple, out-wrestle him. And with the guy who's much shorter than Jalen Turner, who primarily boxes, I think this is a favorable matchup for Jalen Turner. And I have to go with Jalen Turner. I think he wins by decision or knockout. He can catch Bobby Green. All right. And now for the big main event, Beneil Dariush versus Arman Tsarukyan. This is a very big fight that has a lot of implications at 155 and could very much so dictate if one of these guys can get a big win, who's going to get the next title shot. I think going into this fight, if it was a 3-rounder, I would lean more towards Arman Tsarukyan. However, it being a 5-rounder, I would have to lean more towards Dariush. Tsarukyan has shown in his fight against Mateusz Gamrot, in his 5-round fight with him, that he was winning up until I would say halfway through the 3rd round, where he started to slow down and Gamrot was really able to ramp up the pressure, get takedowns, and really steal those last 3 rounds to take a decision. I think Beneil Dariush can implement a similar thing. Beneil Dariush is great. In Beneil Dariush's fight against Tsarukyan, which is a common opponent between the two, he showed that he's able to use his jiu-jitsu to cause scrambles by going for submission attempts, maybe not to secure a submission, but to force scrambles and sweeps to get back to his feet or get on top. And I think against a guy like Tsarukyan, who very much so likes to get the position, secure the position, this is going to be very beneficial for him to not allow Tsarukyan to really settle and get comfortable on the ground. And on the feet, Tsarukyan does make mistakes in his defense striking, although he has great kicks. His boxing defense at times lacks. He has like lapses where he gets caught with things that you maybe would not have expected him to get caught with. And Beneil Dariush has a very sneaky overhand and straight with deceptive power. And I think that can prove a very difficult thing for Dariush as the fight goes on. And we've seen in his fight with Gamrot, as he gets tired, his striking defense falls off a little more. And that would probably be where Dariush would be able to land something big and possibly get a finish. I also believe that in Dariush forcing so many scrambles, it is going to be taxing on the cardio of Arman Tsarukyan as well. So for this fight, I have to go with the underdog, Beneil Dariush. I think his cardio, his well-rounded game, he's one of these guys, like I said, like Jakar Klaus, maybe Arnold Allen, Beneil Dariush, these guys who are above average and very good at a lot of things, but they don't necessarily excel at one aspect of their game. It allows them to force their opponents to fight where they are weakest and where they have an advantage. And I think that's going to be the case with Beneil Dariush. So I'm going with Beneil Dariush in this fight. And that's it, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Scorecard Sports Podcast. I am one half of your Scorecard Sports duo, the Ambiguous Assassin, signing off, and hope to see you later on in the week as we have a interview that I think y'all would love. Thank y'all. Goodbye.